Hey everybody, today is Monday, November 6th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from the Holdovers, editor Kevin Tent.
Needle drops, again, are just kind of like where titles fall. Until you get to the end of the movie, you can't get too committed to anything because it costs so much money and it's just such a back and forth.
And director Alexander Payne.
The first clip on his reel was like a 2-minute take, no editing at all. And I called him up and I said, hey, what's with putting a 2-minute long, like fluid master on your reel? He goes, that shows I know when not to cut.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Hello, my friends. And so we meet again. Sorry for the little break last week. I had some traveling to do, and you know how it goes. But we're back, and back in a big way because we have someone on the show today who is way overdue for being on the podcast. I speak of none other than editor Kevin Tent. When he's not ruling the American cinema editors with an iron fist as their president, he is gracefully editing films for director Alexander Payne, among others. Yes, Kevin has been Mr. Payne's editor for all of his features, going back to their first project together, CITIZEN RUTH, in 1996. From there, they would go on to do Election, About Schmidt, Sideways, The Descendants, Nebraska, Downsizing. Maybe one or two of those are favorites of yours. Election and Sideways are certainly two of mine. So how tight are these two guys? So tight that not only is Kevin on the show today, but he brought Alexander Payne as well. How cool is that? Don't bother to answer. The answer is very cool. Kevin and Alexander Payne, who we will refer to as AP from now on for brevity's sake, are back together for The Holdovers, a film that is an early release at the moment and will be in wide release by the end of the week. This movie is getting a lot of buzz, and with good reason. It takes place at a New England prep school during the Christmas break in 1970. It seems a handful of these kids aren't able to go home for the holiday break, so they must be, quote, held over at the school under the watchful glass eye of irascible Professor Paul Hunham, played by Paul Giamatti. The boys don't like him, he doesn't like them, and soon the ranks get whittled down to just the professor and one kid in particular. What follows is, well, simply what's in the screenplay, as Alexander Payne will tell us. No car chases, no gunfights, no explosions except for one lone cherry bomb in the kitchen. This movie's about people and the pain they carry in their lives and how opening oneself up to others around you can help relieve that pain sometimes. Maybe even help you to grow. It is the kind of movie for which AP and Kevin are so often lauded for making. And I, for one, am grateful that they are still making these kind of movies, because it just doesn't happen enough these days, or at least well enough. So here's a little more about Kevin Tent. And I can already see the troll comments on the YouTube page about me going on too long in the intro. Too bad. I got things I got to tell you. First thing is Kevin Tent is the patron saint of the rough cut. For it is Kevin, who I first met back in 2005, around the time when Sideways came out, opened my eyes up to the fact that if you love movies, if you love TV, there is nobody more knowledgeable, more insightful about those movies and TV shows than the editors. I love Sideways, and meeting Kevin and getting to grill him about Sideways, something I continue to do to this day, has been one of the great joys of my life. Now, you might think that Kevin Tent must be a pretty good guy to put up with you. The answer is yes. Yes, he is. He is such a good guy that he arranged for me and my movie-loving daughter to spend the day on set with Alexander Payne as he shot a few scenes at the prep school that stood in for the fictional Barton Academy in the film, which was amazing. Okay, now I am on the side of the trolls. I have been talking too long. But I had a lot I wanted to share with you. So before we meet Kevin and AP, let me share a little more with you about our sponsor, Extreme Music. As I said, The Holdovers takes place during the winter of 1970. How does one get that time period across to the audience? Well, of course, you have production design, costuming, that kind of thing. Maybe a few feet of simulated snow while you're at it. But everyone knows that there is no more powerful a tool to evoke a time period than music. If you've got a movie or TV show to make, regardless of when it takes place, you should be getting your production audio from the best in the business, Extreme Music. They have a big roster of big-name artists who make up an even bigger catalog of top-shelf tracks that you can sample and license for your next project. And finding that music is easy. You just go to extrememusic.com and search their catalog using terms like genre, as in the 1970s, even using the lyrics. They give you back tracks in different lengths, and even give you the ability to dial in which instruments you want from those tracks. And as far as licensing goes, yes, that's a pain. Usually, but not with Extreme Music. You can do it right there on their website if you like. Or if you prefer, you can have one of their reps give you a call. They have offices all around the world, and together you can get it all sorted out. So the next time you have a story to tell it with great production audio from Extreme Music. All right, this episode definitely counts for me as a great day at the office, despite how bad my research was at times for this one. From The Holdovers, here are editor Kevin Tent and director Alexander Payne.
Comfortable is a different question, but sure,
As long as we're talking about Kevin being president of ACE, Alexander, did you notice any change in Kevin once he became president of ACE?
No, he was always super egotistical.
Good. I want to make sure it wasn't just me. For as much as I like to think I know about you guys, I have to admit I'm a little fuzzy on how you met. Alexander, did you just put an ad in the weekly for an amiable yet affordable editor, or was it a friend of a friend? Was it an agent? How did that work that you found Kevin?
I finally scored my first feature, and I didn't have an editor, and I called up an editor. I knew Carol Kravitz. She had been at AFI when I was at UCLA in the 80s, and I called her and said, "Hey, Carol, you're too busy and probably too expensive to cut this feature I just got. Can you recommend someone?" And she recommended two names, Bill Johnson and Kevin Tent. And then I met with both of them and wound up choosing Kevin.
Bill was busy that day anyways, probably, I'm sure.
Bill went on to have a phenomenal career, editing and directing The West Wing and so forth and so on. But anyway, Kevin dropped off his VHS reel at my house in Koreatown in Los Angeles at about 7:30 one morning, and here we are nearly 30 years later.
I love to tease Kevin that if I introduced him to people today, I would say, meet Kevin Tent, Oscar-nominated editor of The Descendants and films like Sideways and now The Holdovers. But if you met him back in 1996, it's meet Kevin Tent, editor of Not of This Earth, Frankenhooker, and Basket Case 2. And Basket Case 2, not nearly as good as Basket Case 1.
Absolutely.
So he dropped off that VHS. What was it you saw in his work that made you go, this is the guy?
The first clip on his reel was like a 2-minute take, no editing at all. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, what's with putting a 2-minute long fluid master on your reel?" He goes, "That shows I know when not to cut."
Okay, so I don't remember saying that exactly, but that is a really good clip. It was from a movie called Gun Crazy, directed by Tamara Davis. And it is a long master that moves around, but then it gets really intense really quick. And that was kind of jarring. So, I mean, we didn't have the coverage, so it wasn't like we were going to cut into it anyways. But it did work because you got lulled, and then all of a sudden it was like, it got really violent really quick and was a little shocking. So, yeah, it's hilarious that I put that on there.
I've heard, and I could be wrong, that The Holdovers began its life as a TV pilot that writer David Hemmington pitched to Alexander, and then AP said, "No, I don't want to do this as a TV pilot. Let's do this as a feature." Did you know about The Holdovers before it was rewritten as a feature? Does AP ask you for notes on these things? How does he bring you into the fold when he starts a project?
It's not completely accurate what you have, but it's close.
Not unusual.
It's not accurate at all.
Okay, well, I'm off to a good start.
I was trying to be polite.
It's really simple. I had the idea for the movie that I stole from a 1935 French movie. I'd seen it at a film festival about a dozen years ago. And I thought, that's a good premise for a movie, not the story, how it pans out, but the premise. And so I was sitting on this premise for years thinking, I've got to go, out to Eastern prep school someday and research that idea because I'm not from that world. And then about 5 years ago, I received completely randomly a TV pilot set at a boarding school. So that's when I called up the writer and I said, "Hey, you've written a great pilot. I don't want to do it, but would you consider writing a story for me set in that same world?" That's how it happened.
AP, I think you had like 45 pages, right? When I first read the...
Could be because David was sharing, portions of drafts with me during his process.
I think I remember reading I think it was like 45 pages and I thought that seems great. And it was not a full idea yet. And then I think, AP, you usually send me the script when you're thinking seriously about something. You have so many balls in the air, but when you start focusing in on something, then you'll send it to me usually.
Yeah, just to get his read, mostly as a friend and filmmaking partner. And then if he likes it, if it's passing muster, then suggestions on, looking into his editorial crystal ball. That scene will probably hit the floor. That scene will probably hit the floor. But first is just how it bounces off him as my filmmaking partner. Is this a movie?
Right.
So this is another thing maybe I'm getting wrong, but Alexander, I believe that The Holdovers is the first feature that you've directed where you didn't have a hand in writing or adapting it.
Again, you are only partially accurate.
Batting 300.
It's out of 8 features. It's the second one where I don't have screenwriting credit, which is fine. 10 years ago, Nebraska had come to me as a screenplay. And sure, I get under the hood and bevel the edges and make it, directable by me and put in some of my own jokes and that kind of stuff. But that was Bob Nelson's conception and execution, basically. This one was, I would say, my first experience directing a writer. I had the idea. We hashed out the idea together. The story idea together. He would send me different versions of what the story could be, and then I could say yes or put the kibosh on it or whatever. And then we kind of hashed it out together. Then he wrote a script, came up with a bunch of stuff, as he should, that I never could have thought of. But then at the end, of course, I have to get under the hood a little bit and make it more personal to me. So by the end, David and I wound up with a screenplay that was my premise, his screenplay, but personal to us both.
Does that change at all your process with Kevin or the way you work together in the cutting room?
Zero. Because by the time it's going into the directing sausage grinder, it just comes out on the other side in post as material for us to edit. And that process is always exactly the same. Each movie has its own particular tone that we deal with, but where the sausage comes from on the front end has nothing to do with what we're doing on the back end.
Right.
So, Kevin, I don't know if you've ever seen Alexander's Criterion Closet Picks video, where he picks out some of his favorite movies from the Criterion collection. Regardless, I'm sure you know what a serious cinephile he is.
Yes.
Knowing that he has that deep bench, that deep well to draw from in terms of reference movies, does he ever give you things like that, reference points, movies for you to look at?
Yes, I guess there are places that's happened, but mostly he will see movies and just say, oh, Kev, you got to see this movie. This is something else. And when we first started working together, it was a little overwhelming because he had such a library in his head of films. I went to a little film school over here on Vermont Avenue.
Now, that's an excellent film school. Come on.
It was perfect for me, but there was very little theory, and there was one film history class. We watched 8 films in the whole semester. But I tried to catch up because he would say, have you ever seen High Low? And I'd be like, no, I never saw High Low. So then I'd go and see that. So I tried to catch up over the years, but there's no way to catch up with his library of films. And he still goes and sees films all the time. Regarding the holdovers, though, I think, let's say if there's films that were influencers on us, I had probably seen those. So films from the 70s and stuff like that.
After 8 films together, hopefully I got that right, you've created a body of work that's now influencing other people. You have so many things that you've done together to draw from. For example, and again, I'm probably going to get in trouble, in Sideways, Paul Giamatti's character in that film is a teacher, just like in The Holdovers, somewhat of an obsession with porno magazines in both movies.
No, he doesn't look at porn in The Holdovers.
Isn't he sneaking a look? Is that one of the students?
Yeah, Angus did.
Angus,
yeah, Angus does.
I'm blaming that on the editing. Okay, but so a reference to a porn magazine, but also there's a shot in The Holdovers. You're dissolving into a slow zoom into Angus on the phone, and it reminded me of a shot in Sideways where Miles is on the phone in the hospital. You do a slow dissolve into him on the phone to Maya.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, I've watched Sideways one too many times, but do you notice things like that? Are you aware of things like that? Like, hey, we did something like this before, or let's try and do something similar to what we did in this film.
No, and I'm a little depressed by that question because I didn't know it was so repetitive.
I'm the one that's repetitive. I was just looking for things like that, I guess.
Hey, Kev, by the way, you know what I bought off eBay this week? I bought a print of Sideways.
Oh, 16 millimeter?
No, 35.
Really?
I'm sure a release print, and I was able to bargain with him a little bit and got the price down. And I'm having it. I have 2 answer prints. I have 2 answer prints in storage and never been screened. And I want to keep it that way as long as I can. But since next year is the 20th, I thought, may not be bad to have an extra print line around.
Yeah, I wonder if it's in good quality or not.
The seller didn't really know,
right,
but I bought it anyway, and I'm going to take it down to the bench at Film Streams in Omaha and inspect it and see what kind of shape it's in.
Wow, good.
Anyway, sorry, parentheses.
Well, Matt, regarding the dissolves, yeah, that's been coming up a lot because we used a lot of them in the holdovers, but we've always used them. It's been part of our film language all the way back to, well, even Citizen Ruth. We did some really long dissolves on Laura Dern in one of the scenes. So yeah, we've always loved those. There's a couple of really interesting ones in the holdovers, I think, that actually people thought were mistakes at first. And we're like, no, we did that on purpose.
Let's see if I can get this next one close to right. And I have to be kind of right because I was there for it. Kevin, you were so kind to put me together with Alexander so I could bring my daughter to come see him shoot for a day.
That was great. That was really fun. That was really lovely. How's she doing?
She's great. She went to see your screening the other night.
Oh.
Loved it. Wanted to say hello to you, but you were mobbed and it was a school night, so she had to get home. Well, we both loved it, and we loved being there. And we were there on the set the day that Alexander shot what I'll call the crossing the Rubicon scene, where teacher Paul Hunham is chasing the student Angus Tully through the school hallways into the gymnasium, where Angus proceeds to take an ill-advised leap over a pommel horse. I know it's only a sample size of one day out of an entire shoot, but there were a couple of things that stood out to me. The first is just the way you let things just play out. There were long takes. You just let the actors act. And it was such a very relaxed environment. And the other thing that stood out to me was how efficient you and the cast and crew were at moving around. I mean, there's this old saying that it's not the takes that take the time, it's the time between the takes that take the time. That is completely inaccurate to what I saw with you, where it was, you spent all the time on performance and just let the actors do these long takes. And then when it was done, off to the next setup. And before you knew it, we were rolling again.
Like to keep it moving. Got to keep it moving. And I can do that if I've got good grip electric. If they can lay dolly track or get the equipment up and down, get things lit quickly, then I'm good. I need time for performance.
So Kevin, how does that play out for you? You're focusing on just 2 or 3 characters, and there aren't, for an editor, a lot of places to hide when the director has these long takes with just 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these quieter, dialogue-driven scenes seem to be, to me, like probably the hardest type of thing you would work on.
Sometimes it is tricky because AP gets amazing performances from people, but I think it is because he lets them take their time and find the lines properly and stuff like that. So, and we try not to cut too much. We try not to make things too cutty. So it is a challenge to keep things moving, picking up the pace, but keeping the performances solid. And that's probably our biggest challenge. And we had some challenging scenes because we had a couple fairly long talky scenes and we were trying to condense them as the film was evolving.
The tagline for the film is discomfort and joy. And I admit I wrote this question before I saw the film, and it was, is this a comedy with surprisingly touching emotional beats, or is it a drama with a great sense of humor? And now, having seen the film, to me, it's the latter. That balance of when to play up the comedy versus the drama, is that something that is always a delicate process for you guys in these films?
I would say, in this film, not so much. In other films, let's say, I'm just thinking about The Descendants, where we really toned back the comedy because it felt a little forced. But this one, I think the tone kind of came prepackaged into the cutting room. Nothing ever seemed forced, at least a comedy. But we have in the past regulated that editorially, but I don't really remember in the Holdovers if we did. I think we knew, obviously, when Angus dislocates his shoulder that was going to be funny. And, the shots of Paul's face, he's just so expressive. He's so hilarious.
Let me just say one specific thing. It doesn't answer your question directly, but so often in the first reel of a movie, if it's a comedy, but there's a mixture of the tones, either an early audience or your financier or somebody will say, give them permission to laugh. Do something early in the movie that, makes a laugh so people have permission to laugh. And yeah, that's fine. But in this one, the credit sequence has a pretty melancholy song over it. And so maybe we trusted that it was going to be a comedy, but also the first reel then gives people permission to allow it to have melancholy as well. It sort of has this moody, wintry montage and moody music. Oh, but you know what, Kev? I'd say then immediately when we abruptly cut off the music to go inside Paul's apartment, then that kind of says both. It says this is melancholy, this is a drama and a comedy.
Right.
Then Paul Giamatti comes in and you just want to laugh immediately because of what he does in his first line.
And seeing Preparation H.
So funny you bring that up, Kevin. I couldn't help but notice that your credit comes in right after the insert shot of the Preparation H.
It's actually 2 shots before. But,
is it two?
Oh, no, it is right after.
Right
oh, you're right.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
I get a lot of things wrong, but Kevin Tent and Preparation H,
you're right.
I get that right.
I wanted it on the Preparation H, but AP wouldn't let it.
I was going to ask if you had any control over that. Was that just something like where it did land and you said, I got to push this out a few frames?
The credits are always super fluid until they're finalized. So I can't remember how the credits all shook out. We had interesting credits on this too. We did kind of old school credits, which was a lot of fun. Like our sound designer got a main front credit, our music editor, Mindy, our longtime assistant. Yeah.
Kevin, I think having your name over the Preparation H thing, even close to it, is an injustice, but I enjoyed the hell out of it. Going back to the beginning of the film, and you talked about giving them permission to laugh at the beginning of the film, that first part of the film, we start off with the school still in session. You see the kids and the teachers, and then it's just the Holdovers, which is an extended group of kids. And then that gets peeled away until it's just Paul and Angus and Mary. And then we get to know them and enjoy spending time with them. And then it's down to just Paul and Angus. So you kind of work your way into the core of the movie and the core of the characters. I asked about balancing comedy versus drama. How difficult is it to balance context and world building to the point where I really want to get to just being with these three characters?
Mechanically, I think in the screenplay, the one thing that we needed to help out was the seeming deus ex machina of all the other boys being taken away by the helicopter. What you described, though, is kind of what David Hemmingson wanted in the screenplay, which is within a fairly conventional story, still keep them guessing. Like, oh, if you don't know anything about the movie, you think, oh, it's Paul and these boys. Well, actually not these boys. It's about Paul and this one boy. Oh, and then the cook. And then they're going to be stuck at the school. Actually, no, they're going to go to a Christmas party. And then they're going to wind up taking a road trip to Boston. So if I understood your question correctly, which I may not have, I think you're just sort of talking more about how the screenplay functions than the editorial process.
Yeah, I mean, mostly. I guess where I was going with it, and probably not very well, is the impulse to try and shorten the beginning. In other words, the momentum builds when you're with these three. Like, I want to be with these three characters. You're right, and that's what the screenplay lays out. But I just wondered if in editorial, there's a natural impulse to tighten that part when you really shouldn't, because things won't pay off the same way at the end.
A little bit. Let me just say, even in this, by normal screenplay, normal traditional, Sid Field, Robert McKee, whatever screenplay writing, those other four boys should have left by page 30, right? In the script, they leave at page 40. So you go, well, that's too late for them to leave. And on the other hand, having them leave so relatively late by traditional standards, it makes it kind of more of a surprise. Lulls the audience more into thinking, oh, it is about this group of five. And then, no, it's more of a surprise, that sort of thing. But I don't know, Kev, because we took our time with the credit sequence, but then in the first reel, the scene, like you're saying, when you have super talky scenes, you want to tighten those up as much as you can. The scene with the principal, between Paul and the principal, we hit that a few times early on to get that setup scene.
Yep.
I still think there are about 2 shots in there that need about 6 more frames, but
we can add them. We'll figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I can't really add too much to that. I mean, we did tighten a lot, Matt, from where it was originally. I know we tightened in a lot of the scenes to get to where the boys were leaving sooner. And we're always doing that internally within scenes, dropping lines, that kind of stuff. But I think the screenplay is really so amazing.
It was pretty tight. We had a pretty tight screenplay as it was.
Yeah. And just the reveal of Paul, as you dig deeper into Paul, you find out so late in the movie you find out midway through the movie that he basically ran away from home. And then you find out that his dad beat him. And, you just find out all these things about him so late. And normally people try to set all those things up right in the beginning. And I thought I really appreciated the way things were slowly revealed in the movie.
So watching the film being made and watching the film, watching Alexander shoot it, it looked effortless.
By the way, I got to say, I remember having you and your daughter on set, and the stuntman was there that day doing all the flips over the pommel horse. And I kept turning to her and go, did you like this one? Like, which one did she think was funny? I loved having her on set that day.
I think she picked it out. You used take 7, I think, out of 8 or something like that.
Yeah,
I think that was
she liked those last ones, right?
Yeah, and she's been drunk with power ever since. So it's no telling her anything now.
Just wait till she becomes president of ACE, then you'll see how drunk she gets.
I can only imagine. Is there a particular scene for each of you that was the hardest to do, and also which was your favorite? And maybe it's the same thing.
Hardest? Probably some of those scenes where they're watching the Newlywed Game. Probably those scenes, because they were long. I think we dropped some lines in them, trying to keep those moving, and those are probably the most difficult, I think. OAP, what about the scene where we really get to meet the boys in front of the truck outside when they first get held over? That was a little tricky.
Because it's the worst covered scene. It wound up being awkwardly covered because we had snow in that morning, and then the sun came out and it was melting.
Yeah.
We had to squeeze another scene in the back half of the day, so I was kind of rushed. And we made it work finally, but let's just say there's a lot of line crossing in that scene.
Right.
But whatever, it goes by pretty good.
Right.
Kevin, you talked about setting the time period with the credits. Needle drops also to set the time period is very important.
Right.
What is the process that you and Alexander have for that? Is that something where you get to go out on your own and choose stuff? Does he come to you with a playlist? How does that work?
Usually we don't start thinking about music until, let's say on this one, I started putting music in. Mindy, our associate editor and assistant editor for years, she started putting music in. And then we work with Richard Ford, who's a music editor and does a lot with all music. And we bring him in fairly early to start helping us with stuff, both score and needle drops. But needle drops, again, are just kind of like where titles fall. Until you get to the end of the movie, you can't get too committed to anything because it costs so much money. And it's just such a back and forth with, oh, we can get this song, we can't get that song. So that's a long process. But in the beginning, on this movie, I couldn't really hear the music in it. But Mindy put in the Swingle Singers, one of their Christmas songs in, or suggested it. I can't remember if she just gave it to me or she put it in, and that became something thematic that we used a lot, which was great.
Other than audio, how about visual effects? Your last film together, Downsizing, certainly employed a lot of visual effects. In this one, you wouldn't think that plays a part so much, but you had to make Boston in 2022 look like Boston in 1970. Alexander mentioned the lack of snow. I mean, I don't recall us having much snow in the past few years during winter, but I'm sure in December 1970, there was a ton.
We did have a lot of snow.
We did?
Most of the snow in the film is real. Probably 75%. And then it was
augmented,
maybe 72%.
Yeah.
It was then supplemented with a fantastic local, not visual effects, but special effects guy who's on set and told me the other night he had created like 200 tons of snow, of chipped ice to spread out all over the grounds when we need it. And he has little styrofoam sculptures and fluffy, cottony things to put around. And then snow blankets, white things that you lay over grass that makes it easier for visual effects later to lay in snow there. But most of it's real. And most of the scenes where you see it, the snow flurries, those are real snow flurries.
Wow. Okay.
But y'all got some big ass snows in winter of 2022. We were shooting January, February, March. In fact, we got dumped on so much that we lost like 3 days of shooting, I think, because it was too dangerous to move the trucks in.
Maybe I blocked all that out. I must have seen you in March because there was no snow on the ground then.
Yeah.
Going back to the 70s style of shooting, you shot digital and made it look filmic. Was there ever any consideration to shooting 35 millimeter?
There was, like, in a big way. I really wanted to, if it were possible. And the DP, Eigel Brild, and I shot tests in digital, of course, 35 and even 16. And what we realized, there was going to be so much we were going to have to do at the DI anyway, that it didn't make a whole lot of difference. So you might as well shoot digital and have that ease in the budget, because we were going to have to do so much to it. Film stocks are so good these days. Good meaning tight grain.
So, Kevin, if he had shot on film, would you have considered cutting on a Moviola or a Cam?
No, sir. No. We'd be using our Avid. Because AP, I think Sideways was shot on film, and we had negative on that.
Oh, yeah, and The Descendants.
Oh, The Descendants too?
Descendants shot on film, and I think we conformed the neg. Nebraska was the first film I ever shot on digital.
Citizen Ruth was cut on film. We had the old Moviola and the Chems and all that stuff. And I remember, I think I had cut something on Avid. I hadn't cut my first Avid thing right before that. I kept telling AP, oh, you're going to love this Avid thing. You're going to love it. You're going to love it.
And I said, nah, it's just a fad.
There's still time for you to be right. Okay, so 8 films together.
8 films and a pilot.
8 films and a pilot. Was that Hung? Was that the pilot?
Hung.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
God, I got one right for once. After all those projects together, every project you do, you should learn something. You should take away something from it. Is there anything in particular for each of you that you learned from working on the Holdovers?
Yeah, I'm in the market for a new editor.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of what I don't know. I mean, you hope that you keep refining your skill and your craft and all that stuff. So we didn't totally screw it up. So that's a good thing. I don't know. I just hope people enjoy the movie. I hope a lot of people see it because I think in a way it's just so fresh.
And see it with an audience.
Right. It's been said before, like reviews and stuff have said they don't make them like this anymore, and they really don't. And I think it's kind of refreshing. It's funny. My son's friends who have been seeing it, they're young, they're in their 20s. They're really connecting with it, which I think is interesting. I think there's a hunger out there for films like this, character-driven films and simple stories and just nice little stories.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned seeing it with an audience. I know Alexander has, but have you guys seen it with an audience yet? And anything about the audience's reaction to any of the jokes or any of the emotional moments, anything about that surprise you?
I've seen it with an audience a lot of times by now. I love seeing my films with an audience, especially if they're working, because that's when the experience of making it is complete. It takes an audience, not a viewer, but an audience to complete a movie, especially if it's a comedy. Kevin, I never expected so much laughs with the Cherries Jubilee scene. That's one I never saw coming.
Yeah, I think it's because it's such a warm laugh. They're just so enjoying the film at that point that's just an expression that they're having then. Because it's not exactly super funny, but there's something about it that's moving them.
I think the performances you got out of the actors are what made it so funny.
Right.
That's just my opinion. I'm no longer going to say I'm an expert on Alexander Payne and Kevin Tent.
You've done good, Matt. You've done good.
No, this has been fun. This has been really fun.
Okay, well, to wrap it up, Alexander, as I mentioned before with the Criterion Collection closet picks, your knowledge of films is intimidating. I would just love to know if there is a movie or film that has no business being anywhere near the Criterion Collection. What is Alexander Payne's guilty pleasure movie?
Here's the deal with film nerds. First of all, thanks for saying I know some movies, and I do, but I also accuse myself so much of not knowing movies because I've met people whose knowledge absolutely dwarfs my own, and I think I'll never catch up to that. And it's not a competition, but it's just having all the same pleasures those friends of mine have had who have seen all those wonderful movies. I will recommend a movie, not a guilty pleasure, but here's just a movie I've been championing for years. And I just think it's a really neglected masterpiece, which is a 1951 Western called Westward the Women by director William Wellman. And it's about the transporting of 150 women from Chicago to California to become wives. It's based on an idea by Frank Capra and written by Charles Schnee, who also wrote famously Red River and The Bad and the Beautiful. And it's a magnificent movie. But the thing is, there's no such thing as a guilty pleasure. You are entitled to love any movie you love, no matter how trashy you think other people think it is.
And that movie is Frankenhooker.
I was going to recommend Basket Case too. Whether he's working on Frankenhooker or The Holdovers, I stand by my opening statements. Kevin Tent is a gifted editor and one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. Thank you to my personal filmmaking heroes, Kevin Tent and Alexander Payne, for talking to us today about The Holdovers. It's a great movie. And while we're talking about great movies, I personally cannot wait for next year and the 20th anniversary of Sideways. Hopefully I can get AP and Kevin back on to talk about that. But who knows if I can pull that off. We'll see. What I do know is that right now is a great time to make your journey with Avid Media Composer happen. Why right now? Because you have no time to wait. You got to make the most of every day and every opportunity if you want a long and prosperous career as an editor. Plus, Media Composer has never been more powerful with new AI-enhanced features and never more affordable with low-cost subscription pricing in addition to free offerings through Avid's Media Composer for Students program. And you can find out about all that stuff by clicking that link in the show notes. That'll take you to the Media Composer page on avid.com. Well, that is a wrap for the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this one even half as much as I did. As always, it is my privilege to have you along for the ride, and I do hope you come back again for the next one. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.